floor to you, posing three till four questions in a row, and then giving the floor to those other speakers. Who may I invite you to pose your questions or your remarks? Madam, please, your name as well. There is a mic.
Thank you. Thank you. My name is Yvonne Bogaerts. I'm from the World Population Foundation. And I have a question for both speakers. To Steve Sinding, I would like to ask, knowing that funding for family planning has decreased, and you mentioned, I think, the figure of 30% decrease. At the same time, we see in the article in The Economist that the total fertility rate, despite this decrease in funding, also is decreasing at a very high speed. So wondering, are we actually on the right track? Or should we reconsider our current approaches if it's already happening, if the fertility rate is already going down so fast? To the Minister, I would like to ask, being a sexual and reproductive health and rights activist myself, I sometimes wonder if Malthus was right after all. Can actually, looking at food production, current food production, can the world sustain an increasing number of people, knowing that already, for instance, 15% of people in India are being sustained by overpumping, and I believe that also in China it's about 130 million people. And so already those two countries together is over 300 million people being sustained currently by overpumping. Can the world actually sustain that many people? We know that there is no green revolution to be expected. And yeah, maybe famine will become more common. And I would like to hear your reaction on that.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Bogaerts, for Sydney.
Fertility has declined very rapidly. It isn't declining so rapidly today. In fact, a number of countries which were considered spectacular success stories, such as Bangladesh, Kenya, and a number of others, Egypt, Indonesia, have seen the rate of fertility decline very considerably slowed. And one of the reasons for that, I believe, is that family planning services are no longer the priority in those countries that they once were. Add to that the fact that we estimate that there are some 200 million women in the developing world with an unmet need for contraception, which, if met, would considerably reduce fertility. And I think there's still a very strong case for increased funding for family planning programs. What has happened over this last 15 years or so, 20 years, is that the enthusiasm for the subject, both on the part of developing countries and on the part of donor countries, has diminished. The priority that was once given to the subject has in effect been superseded by other issues, so that particularly after the MDGs were published in 2000, without any reference to Cairo, the subject really dropped almost entirely off the political agenda. Because the developing countries, particularly now in Africa, read the signals coming from donor capital so closely and carefully. When they perceive that this is no longer a donor priority, it no longer is a donor priority at home. That's a sad and regrettable reality. And so I think that an intensified dialogue between North and South on this subject, not preaching population policies to developing countries, but discussing the demand that women legitimately voice for contraception, is a very high priority.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, this is a 64 billion question, isn't it? I'm not a determinist. I am somebody who believes in the believes in ideological terms, but I think the precautionary principle is very important as a political tool to act. To do that on basis of evidence and type of knowledge that we have right now. And it is, I think, very clear that even if you're not 100% sure about the population levels in 2050, but let's assume they are around 9 to 10 billion people, that under present production and consumption levels, it's absolutely impossible without destroying the planet. That is sort of the agreed analysis by many scientists. You can differ on that, you can differ on the exact figures, but I think that it's absolutely clear. And taking that from a precautionary principle, I think there's one enormous risk. I mentioned that the politics of change is related in very difficult terms to the way our markets and our democracies works at the moment. They are very much related to short term in terms of both in markets and in politics. So it is our goal and our necessity to find ways to change that, and I think it's possible. Let me give you an example. The fact that you don't have to discuss endlessly population or climate policies to 2050, but at the same time you can find moments and ways in which you can really change consumption and production patterns, and I think governments also have a role to play there. One example, I think for the first time in some years that the whole sustainability movement is getting interesting, because you see that some of our big companies have an enormous interest in the sustainability of certain production in developing countries, and therefore at pre-competitive level they are working together, as we saw for instance in our value chain development programs, together with private business, the government and NGOs. It goes very, very quickly at the moment. People see a self-enlightened interest there, and there is a possibility for pre-competitive cooperation, and I see that also as a role for governments to be a little bit more than only brokers of that, but also setting general frameworks in which that can work. Same goes for consumption patterns, but we have to be a bit more active than we've been so far, and international negotiations are very difficult in that, as we know from what comes up in Copenhagen. But also on the family planning issue, which is the other side of the issue, and I don't want to take any time for the next question, but I very much agree with what's been said by my colleague here. It's been underfunded. There is not, in my view, a constituency behind it, no interest. I mean, everybody talks about green politics, and I appreciate that. It's important for the reasons I just mentioned, but you don't have a similar constituency for family planning. These are poor people that, you cannot make a whole lot of money out of family planning, frankly. And therefore you need really the active political lobbying of governments and of non-governmental organizations and others. Oh, by the way, also of businesses. I was quite pleased in Addis Ababa that we worked closely with some businesses who saw the importance of this. But also on the side of developing countries, I am shocked by the amount of my colleagues in developing countries who are not putting this issue whatsoever on the table. They don't care, it seems sometimes. And then it gets difficult. The last issue which I find is difficult is let's say, the ideological atmosphere in which we are. People tend to become slightly more conservative in times of economic uncertainty and transformations of the world, which I find is very understandable, but it leads often also to more conservatism on these kind of issues. And you see that in the Middle East, but you see it also in parts of Africa, even in Europe. You saw it in the United States, that's shifting now. But for instance, if I look to Central America today, it is very, very difficult to talk about population policy. There's a very strong movement against that. And Jos knows much better than I, having been worked very closely on this issue with Catholic movements in Latin America. That time is not easier than 20 years ago, I think.
Thank you very much. Yeah, 3 in a row now.
Okay. My name is Frans Willikens. I'm from NIDI, Netherlands Demographic Institute.
Yeah.
My name is Frans Willikens. I'm director of NIDI, Netherlands Demographic Institute. I agree with Steve Sinding that there is no country with high population growth that has high economic growth. The problem is it because of economic growth of